Chapter 6. Wild Thing licked Robbie's face again. Robbie was very hot, like a fire. "Wake up, Robbie! Wild Thing's scared! Wild Thing need Robbie!" But the boy just kept sleeping in Wild Thing's stall. The boy hadn't done that before. "Wild Thing no protect. Wild Thing bad. Wild Thing bring Robbie home. But Robbie takes care of hurts. Wild Thing not know how." Wild Thing was afraid to get people, because people hurt Robbie. No animal ever would. But Robbie was already hurt so badly he might die if somebody didn't help him. "Stupid cat no good." Wild Thing bared her teeth when the cat drew near the boy, but the cat hissed. Wild Thing thought about stomping the cat, but she couldn't see how that would help Robbie. "Please, Robbie, Wild Thing not know what to do. Should Wild Thing get people?" Robbie didn't answer, and the sun was up. Robbie had been hurt before, but he'd never stayed asleep after the sun was up. "If try hurt again, Wild Thing have strong hoofs. Maybe can protect." She wasn't sure, but she didn't know what else to do. She rose reluctantly, leaving Robbie in the straw. No one was in the barn, but the door was open. Wild Thing crossed the farmyard to the other barn, where Robbie had his stall. She knocked her face against the door and nickered. No one came. She kicked the door and nickered more loudly. One of the female humans opened the door. Wild Thing was glad. Only male humans ever hurt Robbie. Wild Thing lowered her head submissively. "Need help. Robbie hurt. Please come." The stupid human looked scared, and Wild Thing was afraid she would run away without helping Robbie. Wild Thing shook her head towards the barn. "Robbie hurt bad. Come with, please." Wild Thing started towards the barn, hoping the human would follow. The human slid out of the house. "Good. Not too stupid." Angus sat at the table, waiting for his sons to stumble in for breakfast. The strap rested next to his plate. "I know the boy's not too bright, but after what happened with Tormanstan, you'd think he'd stay away from women. A lady, for Sulis' sake. If I have to wear my arm out doing it, I'll beat some sense into him, this time." Unexpectedly, Boyden arrived at the breakfast table first. Robbie was usually an earlier riser. "Morning," Boyden mumbled. The stench of ale seeped from his pores. His eyes were bloodshot, and he put his head in his hands as if afraid it would fall off. Angus grunted, remembering how many times he'd been in the same condition at Boyden's age. He noticed Boyden's bruised and swollen hands. His oldest son was strong, but sometimes his temper could use a little cooling. "Who was it this time?" he asked. "I take it you came out on top as usual." "You could put it that way." Boyden picked up the mug of beer the servant placed in front of him, but pushed away the porridge as if its odor were noxious. Before Angus could get more details, a goddess-awful scream rent the morning air. "Holy Sulis! That sounded like it was coming from the barn." Angus jumped up. When he ran through the barn door, Robbie's demon-possessed horse reared and neighed wildly, nearly knocking him off his feet. "Robbie, control your damned horse!" Angus shouted. "Why in the seven hells did I let him keep the mad beast?" As usual, when there was work to be done, Robbie was nowhere in sight. Alan and Darren hurried forward and with extreme difficulty restrained the animal. "I'm sorry, sir. Robbie isn't going to be able to do much of anything." Alan nodded towards the open stall. "Someone's hurt him pretty badly." Afraid the lady's men had gotten to the boy, Angus walked cautiously forward. Kara, one of the kitchen servants, was nearly on the ground next to something that beneath all the blood and bruises looked like his son. "Holy Sulis, is he alive?" "At first I didn't think so, but he seems to be breathing," Kara said, her voice shaking. Angus heard Boyden slogging up behind him and remembered the bruises on his hands. "Tell me you didn't do this." He pointed at Robbie. Boyden leaned casually against the stall. "And what if I did? Was I supposed to let him get away thinking he's good enough for a lady? I saw the strap by your plate. Are you angry I got him first? I'll be happy to hold him down if you want to lay a few more on him." Angus smacked Boyden across the face hard enough to stagger him. "You watch your tone, boy." He stopped as he noticed the servant staring at him. He turned to Alan and Darren. "Get the boy inside. Kara, tend to him." As he watched the farmhands carry out his youngest son, the blood against the dark skin reminded Agnes of Donella as she lay dead with her newborn in her arms. When he and Boyden were alone in the barn, he whirled on his oldest son. "You've gone way over the line. You damn near killed the boy. If Robbie needs disciplining, that's for me to do, not you. You'll do his chores on top of your own today, and every day after until he's fit to do them himself. And you better pray he doesn't die. I'll have no kin murderers on my lands. Do you hear me, boy?" Boyden glared at him. "Yes, sir, I hear you just fine." Angus didn't like his tone, but he needed to check on Robbie. No one could replace Robbie's skill with animals. When Angus entered Robbie's bedroom, the kitchen servant was bending over him. "How is he?" asked. "Master Angus, he's not breathing right. I don't know the slightest thing about healing. Maybe you ought to send for someone," Kara said. Angus scowled. They both knew Father Gildas wouldn't touch the boy, and even if he would, Angus wouldn't have trusted him. The damn priest had been trying to find a way to kill Robbie since the day he was born. There was only one other healer in the valley, the Sulis-cursed, interfering old herb bitch. 16 years ago, he'd thrown her smelly carcass off his lands and told her to stay the hell away from his family. While he was trying to come up with another solution, Beacon, his foreman, ran in, looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Sir, the goddess protect us! Demons have descended upon us! A plague of them has destroyed all the grain in the east fields!" "What in the seven hells are you blathering on about? Nothing but fire could destroy that much grain in a single night." "I swear it's all gone, sir!" Angus was certain Beacon was overreacting, as he always did, but he needed to check on the situation. He looked back at his son, lying without moving on the bed. "Send one of the boys for mist," he told Kara. "Damn Boyden! I'll make him pay for forcing me to let that bitch back inside my house." Angus followed his men. When he reached the east fields, he was certain he couldn't be seeing correctly. The day before, the fields had been covered with calf-high grain. Today, nothing was left. Some of the crop appeared to have been devoured, but much of it had merely been torn out by the roots and trampled. "Who or what could have done this? It would take an army of men to destroy this much grain in a single night." Angus had the men fan out to look for clues. "I found something, Master Angus," one of the hands called, but all the fool could show him were a few strands of some kind of very odd hair. It was colored like nothing he'd ever seen, a dull bronze. What it belonged to, Angus couldn't even begin to guess. The men talked of demons. "Maybe we should send for the priest," Boyden, who joined them during the search, suggested tentatively. Angus scowled. He hated that fat cow of a priest nearly as bad as he hated the herb bitch, but not knowing what else to do, he nodded. Angus glowered as Father Gildas's carriage stopped at the edge of his fields. A novice jumped from the seat and opened the door. The novice staggered slightly as the priest used him for support, stepping down from the carriage. How in the seven hells could that tub of lard convince the church he was important enough to be assigned 3 novices? The priest smiled, the fake pious smile that always made Angus want to kick him in his ample gut, this morning even more than usual. "I see evil has descended upon your household, as I always feared it would," the priest simpered. "I have felt a disturbance emanating from beyond the far mountains for several days now. Clearly, Sulis was trying to warn me of this coming disaster." "Mightn't have been more helpful if she warned me before it happened," Angus snapped. "As blasphemous as ever, I see. It's just such an attitude that got you excommunicated nearly 20 years ago when you brought that demon witch home. The child born of her blood brings this evil upon you now." Angus laughed bitterly. "I should have known you want to blame this on Robbie. Get off my lands. I don't need any help from a supposedly celibate priest who's fathered half the bastards in the valley. How dare you speak so of Sulis' chosen? Know this, Angus Camlistan. Your crops will continue to be destroyed until you rid this valley of contamination and come to Sulis on bended knees begging forgiveness." Father Gildas stalked back towards the carriage. Angus swore under his breath as the carriage creaked away. "Father, he speaks for Sulis," Boyden said. "Shouldn't we at least consider what he says?" Angus glared at his son. "That fraud speaks for no one but himself. After what you did to your brother, just how could he have done this? Tonight we'll stand watch, and we'll stop whatever it is." Several acres away, Miss saw Angus and Father Gildas arguing. "Puffed-up buffoon calls himself a priest of the goddess of healing. Can't even cure a simple head cold." Her throat tightened as she approached the house and entered Donella's kitchen. "And I'm not as omnipotent as I'd like to be. I couldn't save the woman who was the closest thing to a daughter I ever had. Will I be able to save her child, the sweet babe that cost her life?" Miss remembered when she held the tiny infant in her arms second after he emerged from his mother's body. She had never seen one that small who lived. Despite the many years that had passed, she still thought of him as an infant. She entered the bedroom. "Holy Sulis, mother of us all!" she whispered. "What happened to him?" Robbie was naked on the bed, and Kara, one of Angus's servants, was cleaning the blood from his body. That he was full grown was shocking enough, but it was his condition that truly appalled her. "Thank the goddess you're here," the servant said. "He's not breathing right, and I don't know what to do." Miss shoved her basket of remedies and herbs at Kara and sat down on the chair the servant had been using. She called on the goddess's power. As she moved her hands over Robbie's body, his life energy flickered. The wound in his back was deep and filled with splinters. Several ribs were broken, as was his nose. His entire body was covered in bruises, and he raged with fever. His brain had been battered inside his head, but most serious of all, his organs had ruptured, filling his abdomen with blood. If they'd waited much longer to send for her, she would have been too late. "Whoever did this to you, child, had better hope I never get my hands on them." Miss closed her eyes and entered a healing trance. She gasped as her energy began to vibrate with the boys. "The boys at Amahill are like his mother. How dare Angus keep this from me? Who else in the valley could help him train his gift?" As Miss remembered Donella's last words, shame filled her. "Promise me," Donella had begged. "Promise me you'll look after little Robrick and Boyden. Watch over my babes." Angus had made the promise difficult to keep, but she should have tried harder. "Donella, my daughter, can you ever forgive me for not knowing? Somehow I should have found out." With difficulty, Miss shoved her emotions aside so she could fully access her energy and close the vessels leaking out the boy's life. When she emerged from the trance, she was trembling with exhaustion. She told the waiting servant to remove the splinters from the wound on his back and poulticed it with an herb mixture she'd brought. She then collapsed on the floor and lost consciousness. At dusk, all hands gathered, and Angus armed them with hoes, pitchforks, and scythes. Boyden shook his head in disbelief. "As if a demon can be fought with farm tools. We are all imbeciles to listen to him. I should refuse, even though that Sulis damn fool threatened to disinherit me. Except he just might do it." Boyden snorted. "Pretending to care about what I did to the worm when I can't even count the number of times he's beaten the weakling senseless himself." Boyden barely listened to his father blathering on about the signal horns and what to do if they saw the beast. Boyden well knew what he'd do, and it wasn't playing some little song for the demon to dance to. Angus then dismissed them to surround the fields the demon hadn't yet destroyed. When Boyden learned his father planned him to stand watch on the far east end of the fields, closest to the woods, he was furious. "Does the old man want me dead or something? Just who does he think the worm's demon will come looking for first?" Boyden shuddered as he remembered those eerie green eyes looking up at him from the dirt. "Freak like that should never have been allowed to live. How could my father have married a witch?" Before it grew dark, Boyden started a fire in order to better see the approaching demon. But outside of its light, Boyden could see nothing but the fires of the other men. Tonight was a full moon, but clouds blocked all light. As the hours passed with nothing happening, he grew more bored than scared. He sat near his fire, using his knife to whittle a woman out of a branch. He carved her breasts large like Arlene's or Blair's. When he thought of the two women, he threw the carving into the fire with disgust. Why do women always have to make a simple thing like fucking into a damn marriage proposal?" He struggled against sleep, but the night was quiet, and there was nothing whatsoever to do. He heard the ground being ripped to shreds, and he wandered out from beneath the trees. A beast of immense size, at least the height of 5 men, towered over him. Its eyes glowed red. The worm rode on the beast's back, and he too had grown to gigantic size. Robbie's eyes matched the red of the beast. "You will pay," he said. "You will all pay." The beast opened its mouth and breathed fire, incinerating Angus. "For the strap, old man, you die." As he laughed over his father's ashes, Robbie turned the beast towards Boyden. Boyden tried to run, but his feet refused to move as the demon drew near, its fangs dripping with emerald green venom. "Hungry, my friend?" the worm asked, and the beast's mouth moved closer. "Please, Robbie, don't!" The worm laughed and rubbed his chin. "Prove to me you've learned your lesson. Come and lick my boots clean." Boyden stared at the worm's boots. They, too, were green with venom. "No, please, have mercy!" "What mercy did you show me?" The beast lowered its head. Boyden could feel its hot breath and feel poison drip against his skin. Boyden cried out and jerked awake. A light rain was falling. "Infernal dream!" He cursed and tried to shake off the terror of the nightmare. Almost immediately he realized it wasn't the dream or the rain alone that had disturbed him. He heard a sound like a gigantic jaw ripping plant life from the ground and reducing it to powder. Boyden sprang to his feet and looked frantically across the field. The clouds had parted, and no more than a single acre away, in the light of the full moon, Boyden saw the silhouette of an animal of some kind. The beast screamed an unearthly scream and reared towards the sky. The moon illuminated a glittering form on the beast's back. The beast turned towards Boyden, and Boyden ran as if all the host of the seven hells were after him. As the sun started to rise, Angus watched his hands attempt to sneak back to the positions they deserted during the night. He intercepted his foreman and grabbed him by the arm. "Where in the seven hells have you been?" Beacon wouldn't meet his eyes. "We've been in the bunkhouse, sir. All of us. We heard what the priest said, and we've agreed we won't risk our lives and our souls trying to stop a demon." Angus wanted to bash the man's head against a rock. "It got to West Fields last night. I just came by that way. So you all cowered in safety where the demon wreaked havoc. If we don't stop this thing, just what do you think you're going to eat this winter? You fancy starving, do you?" Beacon raised his eyes to meet Angus's. "More than I fancy trying to stop a demon with a pitchfork, sir. Master Boyden was in the Westfield. Nobody's seen him." Feeling suddenly weak, Angus grabbed Beacon's shoulder for support. "No, Sulis, not my eldest. Check the house to make sure he's not there, and then get everyone to meet me in the Westfields." When Angus reached the Westfields, a group of his hands stood staring at the ruined grain. Angus barreled towards them. "This," he pointed to the remains of his crop, "will come out of your wages, and if my son is—" Angus couldn't complete the sentence. "Find my son." The men began to search. After half an hour, they'd found nothing other than a few metallic bronze hairs. "Please, Sulis, don't let him be dead." One of the hands shouted, and Angus hurried towards him. Boyden was lying at the edge of the field. He looked like he'd been dragged through the forest by a runaway horse. His clothes were in tatters. His face and arms were badly scratched, and he had twigs and leaves sticking in his hair. But he was breathing. Angus yelled for water, and someone handed him a canteen. He lifted Boyden's head and tried to force the water past his lips. To Angus's intense relief, Boyden spluttered and opened his eyes. "I'm sorry, sir," he whispered. "I couldn't stop it." Angus blinked back tears. "It's all right, son. Just tell me what happened." Boyden asked for something more powerful than water, and Angus had it brought to him. Boyden's story was the stuff of nightmares. "I heard this horrible noise. I swear it sounded like demons being tortured. I blew the signal horn, but no one came. At first I could see nothing, but then the clouds parted and the moon shone on it. Holy Sulis, it was the height of 5 men. Its eyes glowed red, and it breathed fire. It had fangs as long as my finger, and they were dripping green poison. It spoke to me, if such a horrible noise can be called speaking. It said Robbie had called it up. It said if you don't put Robbie in charge and make him your sole heir, it will destroy everything. The crops, the barn, the livestock, even the house, and all of us. It tore the scythe right out of my hands. And if I hadn't run then, it would have had me. Father, there was nothing I could do against it." As Robbie woke, pain shot through him. He kept his eyes closed. He didn't want to wake up. Not now. Not ever. In his entire life, he'd met one single person who liked him and had only one good day. And for that, he'd been beaten nearly to death. What's the use of trying any more? Things will never change. A spasm of pain passed through him, and he cried out. A hand grabbed his, and a woman's voice spoke. "Ride out the pain, my son. It will be better soon." He felt a warm tingle, similar to what he felt when treating sick animals, and the pain dulled. He opened his eyes. An old woman was sitting next to his bed, holding his hand. It was the half-breed witch, Mist. the one his father hated. Kara was sitting beside her. The witch smiled, but her eyes seemed to be wet with tears. With her free hand, she smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "It's a good thing you inherited your mother's abilities. If it weren't for your gift, you wouldn't have survived. Kara said your brother did this to you. Is it true?" Robbie just stared at the witch. Although she seemed to be speaking his language, her words made no sense. The tenderness of her touch made even less. He decided he was still unconscious. "If I'm going to dream of somebody, why can't it be my lady?" He licked his lips. They were dry and cracked. "Are you thirsty?" the old woman asked. He nodded, but still didn't say anything. She let go of his hand and poured a glass of water from a pitcher on the table beside the bed. Next to the pitcher was the green ribbon Milady had given him. It had been cleaned and pressed. He grabbed it. "I cleaned it up for you." Kara spoke up for the first time. "I thought you'd want that. I'm glad you're not going to die." Why would she even say that? She'd never even wanted me to be in the same room with her before. Robbie closed his eyes again as the herb witch helped him lift his head to drink. He hoped things would make sense when he opened them again. But when the witch lowered him back onto the pillow, the two women were still looking at him with concern and tenderness. Of course, it was too good to last. Angus pushed Miss aside, grabbed Robbie by the front of his nightshirt, and yanked him out of bed. "How dare you do this to me, you cursed son of demons!" His father slapped hard enough that his head snapped back. "I haven't done anything!" Robbie cried. "Liar!" Angus lifted his hand to hit him again, but the herb witch grabbed his arm. "Angus, what in the seven hells do you think you're doing? Boyden nearly killed him. Are you trying to finish the job?" Angus dropped Robbie onto the bed and threw off Mist's hand. The herb witch stepped between him and his father, and Angus jabbed a finger into Mist's chest. "You won't use your infernal magic on me. No one, least of all you, has a right to interfere between a man and his son. He's called up demons and destroyed half my crop. He will pay for it. Now get out of my way." Robbie cowered as far away from his father as he could get. "Holy Sulis, he's gone mad. He's gonna kill me." "Have you lost your mind?" Miss echoed Robbie's thoughts. "How can you possibly blame what's happened on Robbie? I don't have to explain myself, woman." Several farmhands came into the room. "Throw off my lands, boys," Angus ordered. But before the farmhands could touch Mist, the old woman grasped Angus by the throat. "Stand back," she ordered, and the men stopped. Angus's face went white, and he began to choke. "Angus, he is your son. He is Danella's child. What could possibly make you think he's responsible?" Angus grabbed the herb witch's wrist, but he seemed incapable of removing her hand. His father, the biggest man in the valley, was helpless against the old woman. "Boyden saw it. He barely escaped with his life. Now get your filthy hands off me." "What is he accusing me of? Why does he always believe Boyden and not me?" Robbie couldn't count the number of times he'd been beaten for something Boyden had done. It had never mattered when Robbie swore his innocence, and he knew it wouldn't matter this time either. The only thing stopping his father from killing him was an old woman. The herb witch's eyes narrowed. "Boyden's nearly beaten his brother to death. Robbie wouldn't be alive now if he hadn't inherited his mother's gift. Did it never occur to you Boyden might be lying?" "Robbie is my son, not yours. Get out of my way. I'm going nowhere until you give me your sacred vow to hurt him no further." The herb witch's voice vibrated with power. Angus shot her a look of pure venom. "Get off my lands. Don't ever try to come back and I won't touch him." The herb witch tightened her hold and Angus trembled. "I said your sacred vow." Angus hesitated and the herb witch's hand tightened further. He cried out as if he were in pain. "I'll give you my vow, you Sulis cursed interfering bitch. I promise by the goddess on my mother's grave that if you get the hell off my lands right now, I won't harm the boy." The herb witch released her hold and Angus fell against the wall, gasping. "If you break your vow, I will be back. Don't think you can harm him without me finding out." "Get off my property," Angus roared. The old woman turned to Robbie. "If you need me, please come to me at any time." She gave Angus one last glance and left. His father turned back towards him and Robbie cowered away. "Oh, Sulis, no. Please, no." "Don't think that damn bitch can protect you. You will go out there and you will stop this tonight, or you better hope you can run fast enough to outpace a mob." Without waiting for a response, Angus stormed out of the room. Robbie collapsed onto the bed. After several minutes, someone entered. He looked up in terror, expecting his father, but it was the kitchen girl, Kara. "What does he think I've done?" he asked. Kara told him of the destruction of half of their grain and related Boyden's description of the demon. Robbie put his head in his hands, one of them still clutching Milady's ribbon. "How can he blame me for this? What does he think I can do about it?" He needed time to think, and he needed Wild Thing by his side. She was his only true friend. He told the kitchen girl to leave so he could get dressed. Kara put her hands on her hips. "You're not well enough to get out of bed." Robbie glared at her. "Don't you think I know that? Now get the hell out of here." "Fine. Go out there and get yourself killed. See if I care." Kara stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. When has she ever cared? Gritting his teeth against the pain, Robbie managed to get dressed, carefully placing Milady's ribbon in the pocket of his shirt. He grabbed the table by the bed and forced himself to his feet. Since he didn't immediately fall, he decided he could walk. He opened the door and cautiously looked out into the deserted hallway. Using the wall to steady himself, he walked to the kitchen. He paused at the door. The barn had never seemed so far. He took a step and nearly stumbled, but caught himself on a large, warm body. Robbie nearly cried out in relief to see Wild Thing. "I've got some problems, girl. Can you help me get somewhere private and help me figure out what to do?" "Wild Thing, help!" Robbie clung to the mare, and the two of them slowly made their way across the farmyard and into Wild Thing's stall. There, Robbie collapsed, and Wild Thing lowered herself beside him. Robbie buried his face in her warmth. A wild mixture of anger and guilt came from her. "You're not blaming yourself for what Boyden did to me, are you, girl?" "Wild Thing not stop, brother. Wild Thing has strong hoofs and strong teeth. Robbie never tie Wild Thing again. Wild Thing stomp into mash if try to hurt Robbie. Robbie good. Robbie make things feel better, even stupid cats. Brother bad. Lady good, too. Lady give Wild Thing apple. Wild Thing like apples." Robbie threw his arms around her neck. "What would I do without you?" "Robbie never be without Wild Thing." "I hope you're right, girl." Comforted by her fierce protectiveness, Robbie rested against her side. He told her about how the crops were being destroyed and how his father was blaming him. "Be all right. Beasts like Robbie." Robbie almost laughed. "Not beasts like that. Boyden said it was the height of 5 men. Who care how big? What beast not like Robbie?" Robbie shook his head, not knowing how to make Wild Thing understand. Seeking out the monster seemed insane, but what choice did he have? He curled up next to the horse and fell asleep. As he slept, he danced with a beautiful lady who found his green eyes stunning. She kissed him and promised to be his and his alone. As he dreamed, he felt the weight of the ribbon in his pocket. A bucket full of cold water woke Robbie. He sprang into a sitting position, crying out in pain. His father was standing over him. "So this is where you've been hiding out," Angus said. "Now get out there and banish that demon back to wherever you're called it up from, or don't you ever let me set eyes on you again." Angus stomped from the barn. "I'll go get myself killed if that will make you happy." Robbie winced as he tried to stand. He was very hungry and thirsty. He doubted his father would let him go into the house and eat before heading for the fields to be torn apart by demons. So Robbie saddled Wild Thing and led her out of the barn. At the well, he stopped and drew up a bucket of water. He took a long drink and then let Wild Thing drink her fill. Clenching his teeth against the pain, he swung into the saddle and headed for the fields. As he passed the bunkhouse, someone called his name. "I thought you might need this." Kara came out of the darkness, handed him a basket, and ran back into the bunkhouse. "That was odd. What is she up to?" Robbie rode to the border between the west and south fields, dismounted, and opened the basket. He found bread, cheese, 2 apples, and a large bottle of beet. The beet was cold rather than hot like he liked it best, but it was sweet, rich, and delicious. He devoured the bread and cheese and drank every last drop of beet. He gave one of the apples to Wild Thing and saved the other for later. He leaned against a tree and allowed Wild Thing to graze nearby, knowing she wouldn't wander far. He stared across the fields and waited for something to happen. He knew he should be frightened, and part of him was, but most of him was too tired to care. The moon was halfway across the sky when Wild Thing nudged Robbie awake. He heard a noise that wiped all sleep from his eyes, the sound of plants being ripped from the earth and ground into powder, followed by an unearthly wail. Robbie stumbled to his feet and looked around wildly. Less than 100 yards away was a silhouette of a horse with a demon knight on its back. The demon saw him, and its horse reared, pawing the night sky. Robbie froze in panic. He wanted to jump on Wild Thing and not stop running until he reached Murtaugh. But even in his fear, he could feel the horse's terrible pain. He couldn't leave an animal who needed him without trying to help it. "Forgive me, Sir Knight," Robbie said. He slowly approached the demon knight, trying to be as deferential as possible. "Your horse is badly hurt." The demon knight didn't answer. Robbie instinctively reached out with his mind to the injured beast. He screamed and fell to his knees, feeling as though his skin had been ripped from his body and his mouth torn apart with a knife. He struggled to his feet. "Please, Sir Knight, let me help your horse." The demon knight still made no answer, but the horse reared and wailed. As it did, the knight rocked, and his helm tumbled off and landed with a thud. "Holy Sudas, mother of us all! It has no head!" Robbie nearly fled in terror, but the headless knight wobbled on the horse's back, and Robbie realized it was only an empty suit of armor. Feeling less afraid, Robbie grabbed the apple he saved and approached the horse. "It's okay. I know you're hungry. I know you're hurt. I help hurt creatures. Let me help you." The demon horse pawed the ground nervously but didn't move. Carefully, so he wouldn't be caught in the horse's pain again, Robbie sent feelings of comfort and safety. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." He held out the apple. The creature tossed its head and pawed the ground. "Come on, you can have it." The beast shook its head but inched closer. Nothing Boyden said about it was true. The horse was indeed larger than Wild Thing, but nowhere near the height of 5 men. 19 hands at the shoulder, it was large for a horse, but not unnaturally so. Robbie could see it didn't have fangs, and it hadn't yet breathed fire. Its eyes also failed to glow red. When it was close enough, Robbie patted its nose gently with his left hand while he continued to offer the apple with his right. As the horse took the apple, it wailed that unearthly wail again, and threw the apple to the side, knocking Robbie to the ground. It reared, and Robbie scrambled out of reach of its hoofs. Something was very wrong with the horse's mouth. Trembling with the pain of his own injuries, Robbie got slowly to his feet. "Your mouth hurts, doesn't it? Let me help." He set the image of a soothing salve he had in the barn. The horse moved towards him as if begging for relief. When Robbie was able to get close enough again, he looked for the cause of the horse's discomfort. It was hard to see clearly in the darkness, but he could tell there was some kind of bit in the horse's mouth. He continued to talk as he fumbled, looking for a way to release the bit. He found the straps fastening it, undid them, and pulled the bit gently from the beast's mouth. He couldn't take the horse to the barn. If he was found with it, his father would never believe he hadn't summoned the demon to begin with. Angus would kill them both. Robbie thought of the abandoned stable in the woods where he'd eaten the preserves. He could take the horse there. He would have to leave the horses near the barn and sneak in and get the supplies he needed. But he couldn't see another choice. He put his hands on both sides of the horse's nose, stared into its eyes, and explained his plan. Robbie felt the demon horse's trust. He whistled for Wild Thing, who trotted up to his side. He picked up the empty helm and attached it to Wild Thing's saddle. Then he swung into the saddle. Holding the other animal's reins, he walked the horses back to the edge of the fields and hid them both in a small clump of trees behind the barn. He impressed upon them the need to stay still and silent. Wild Thing he knew wouldn't fail him. He could only hope demons were as reliable as horse studs. Robbie crept silently into the barn. Not daring to light a lantern, he felt around in the darkness. He found a large sack and quickly selected the things he needed to care for the demon horse. He also took a bag of oats to make warm mash. He returned to the horses, loaded the supplies on Wild Thing, and rode in silence to the abandoned stable. Robbie led the horses inside. When he lit the lantern he kept there, he let out a whistle of amazement. The horse was a bronze-colored mare that looked more like it was forged out of metal than living flesh. But the horse's impossible color wasn't the only thing that struck Robbie. Sores spotted the beast's body. Pus and blood oozed from under the saddle. The horse's coat was matted with dried blood. Her ribs stood out in stark detail. How could anyone neglect a horse so badly? Where have you come from, girl? Robbie could feel a wail building up inside the horse, so he hurried to take the armor and other equipment off her back, unsaddled her, and removed the harness. Robbie looked the horse in the eyes. I need to fetch water and warm it so I can make you feel better. Do you understand?" The horse nodded. Robbie lit a fire in the brazier he used to warm the place in the winter and went to fetch water from the stream. He poured it into 2 different containers. The first he mixed with herbs that would both cleanse the horse's wounds and deaden the pain. In the other he poured oats to make the mash. When the herbal mixture was ready, he used it in a large jar of his best ointment to treat the horse's injuries, beginning with the mouth, which was cut and raw. No wonder the animal was so thin. Eating anything rougher than mash would be excruciating. As always, when he touched an animal in need, he felt the gratifying tingle of energy. He sighed with pleasure of it and wondered if this was what it was like to be touched by a woman, by my lady. "I don't think you're a demon, but I don't know what you are. By the look of the armor, you must have been some knight's lady. But what happened to him? Sores like these don't form overnight. If he's still alive, he obviously doesn't deserve a lady like you. So how about it? Will you be my lady?" He paused at the sound of his own words. "My lady. I had a lady once. For one day, that is. My brother didn't approve. I'm sure he wouldn't approve of you either." After treating the horse's injuries, he fed her the warm mash. When she'd finished with it, the horse radiated contentment and gratitude. Robbie saw the first rays of dawn's light on the horizon and knew he needed to get back to the farm. He promised the bronze horse he'd return as soon as he could. The sun was coming up as he reached the barn. He was about to unsaddle Wild Thing when his father and Boyden burst in. Robbie moved behind Wild Thing, despising himself as a coward.
"So," his father said, "you dare defy me and leave our grain to be devoured by demons? I should—"
He moved threateningly towards Robbie, but Wild Thing bared her teeth. "I was out there all night. Nothing happened," Robbie protested, trying not to cower.
"Oh, really?"
Angus turned to Boyden.
"Saddle the horses, son."
Then he wheeled back to Robbie.
"You're going with us, boy, and you better not be lying."
When Angus saw the undamaged grain, he seemed angrier. Robbie wasn't surprised. Nothing he did ever pleased his father. Angus glared at him.
"You'll watch again tonight, and the night after, and the night after that, until we're sure the demon won't come back. Get back to the farm and get to bed. You're useless in that condition."
When Robbie reached the barn, he was too tired to do anything other than unsaddle the horse and collapse in Wild Thing's stall. Robbie awoke near sunset. When he moved, the pain wasn't too bad, but his stomach ached with hunger. He walked to the barn door. As he looked across the farmyard at the main house, he saw Boyden's face, commanding him to lick his boots clean. He smelled the odor of food coming from the bunkhouse and headed there instead. When Robbie entered the bunkhouse, all conversation stopped. The farmhands stared at him with a mixture of shock and suspicion. Some drew stars over their breasts. Robbie tried not to let it bother him. The bunkhouse was dominated by one large room divided between sleeping and eating areas. The rear portion contained 20 beds, each with 2 bunks, 5 of which were presently unused. Behind the bunks were several smaller rooms proportioned off with curtains for married couples. Most of the female servants slept on the second floor of the main house. In the front half of the bunkhouse were 4 long tables, each capable of setting 10 people. A 5th table at the front held food from which the farmhands served themselves. Robbie took a bowl, dished up some stew, and grabbed a hunk of bread. He sat at the end of one of the tables. Everyone who had been sitting at that table moved elsewhere. Across the room, several of the hands whispered. After a few minutes, Alan detached himself from the group and sat across from him. Alan was only a little older than Robbie, and they'd grown up together, caring for the animals. He wasn't exactly a friend, but he never seemed to be afraid of him like so many of the others, perhaps because he had a large purple mark covering his lower right cheek. "So, any special reason for eating with our hands today?" Alan asked. "I like the company better." Alan raised an eyebrow and looked down the empty table. Then he looked at Robbie's bruise-covered face and nodded. "I see. I guess that makes sense." Alan walked back to the others. Robbie, with the help of Alan and Darren, milked the cows and settled the animals in for the night. Then he gathered the supplies he needed to care for the bronze horse. After he loaded them onto Wild Thing, he tied the green ribbon around a thin strip of leather, which he then tied around his neck and tucked under his shirt. He knew he'd never see her again, but he wanted the reminder that at least one person in the world didn't despise him. He was about to head to the forest stable when his father arrived. Robbie tensed and moved closer to Wild Thing.
"You're going out there again, and you'll stay until we come and get you at dawn. Do you understand, boy?"
Robbie glared at his father without answering. "I saved his fields, and he still talks to me like this." Angus's face turned red.
I said, do you understand, boy?
Yes, sir. Robbie didn't bother trying to hide his anger. If Wild Thing hadn't been there, his father probably would have slapped him.
Good. Get out of here.
His father laughed. Robbie grabbed an extra blanket, walked Wild Thing out of the barn, and swung onto her back. When he arrived at the stable in the woods, the bronze horse neighed. Robbie could tell she was hungry, and the soothing effects of the salve had worn off. He quickly lit the brazier and started cooking oat mash while he tended the horse's injuries. The horse began to relax as the salve brought relief. When the mash was ready, he fed the mare. She greedily devoured it and then fell asleep. He petted the sleeping horse. "What's your name, my girl? Where did you come from? That was pretty brazen of you to destroy my father's crops like that. Maybe that's what I should call you. Lady Brazen." The mare made no response, and Robbie left her to her rest. Robbie then examined the saddle and other equipment Brazen had been carrying: armor, a sword, and a pair of saddlebags. Everything was of exquisite workmanship and gleamed brightly in the lantern light. The saddle was made of expensive leather and tooled with bronze inlays in the pattern of crossed swords. It was in perfect condition. The suit of armor was made of bronze and too big for him, but he thought it might fit him when he reached his full height. He wondered who'd worn it. It was too small for any normal Porflandian man. The sword interested him most. It reminded him of the one Milady had worn. Only rarely had he seen a real sword, and he never touched one. The scabbard was of the same leather as the saddle, and tooled with a matching pattern of bronze inlays. The sword's hilt was made of bronze, and its pommel was tooled with an identical pattern of crossed swords. He pulled the sword from the scabbard, and its steel blade glittered. Although Robbie knew nothing about swords, it felt comfortable in his hands. "With this, I can make sure no one ever beat me again." He let out a disgusted snort. "Except if I ever dared show it to anyone, I'd be hanged as a thief." He could imagine the king's officer's reaction when he tried to explain he found them. "I wouldn't even believe myself." He returned the sword to the scabbard, and carefully hung it and the armor in the stable. He then looked in the saddlebag, which contained a dagger that matched the workmanship of the sword, and clothing of fabric so fine Robbie had never touched anything like it. It shimmered and slid through his fingers. Could it be silk? The clothing was also dyed bronze and embroidered with bronze thread in the same pattern of crossed swords. What would Milady think if she could see me in this? Robbie looked at the sleeping horse. He was pretty sure she wasn't from the Seven Hells, but he had no explanation for her or the condition of her gear. The gear should have shown some signs of age or wear, but all of the bronze sparkled untarnished, and the leather looked brand new. He yawned, too tired to worry about it tonight. He turned to Wild Thing. "Do me a favor, girl. Wake me up before dawn." Wild Thing nuzzled him with her nose. Knowing the mare wouldn't fell him, Robbie wrapped himself in a blanket and fell immediately asleep. That night, as he slept, the demon lady came again. She smiled at him. "It is well, my son. She will protect you as I cannot." Robbie reached out to touch the demon lady, but when he clasped her hand, it was Milady who smiled at him. He drew her into his arms, and they danced until dawn.